right, good morning everybody. I didn't think it was going to be a very good morning this morning. The speakers went out for dinner last night and I got back to the hotel and I suddenly realised I haven't got my glasses. And those of you who have coped with advancing age and trying to read screens without glasses will know that this is a bit of a disaster. But it's all right, I had my phone so I could get... Oh, I can't read my phone. Thanks to one of the organisers, I got my glasses back this morning so I can see what we're doing and we have a fighting chance of getting through the presentation. I'm just dependent on some scripts that can be a bit flaky, an internet connection, and I am just mildly nervous this morning. What else could possibly go wrong? So, welcome. I think this was billed as the missing module Graph++. I sometimes talk about this as who, what, where, when, why, and how, but this is a session on a module that I wrote for Microsoft Graph that I call Microsoft Graph++. As well as thanking our sponsors, as well as thanking the organisers, I need to thank our sponsors. I said in my session yesterday, we wouldn't be here without them. We certainly wouldn't be here without our sponsors. And so if you haven't made it clear to sponsors that you happen to meet how grateful you are, please do so before the end of the end of the conference. Some details of me, again, repeating what I said yesterday. I've been doing PowerShell a very long time, almost as long as I've had that avatar. The old Microsoft logo dates the avatar, which is actually a throwaway joke about my habit of wearing free Microsoft clothing that we got given, and I'm still rounding up free t-shirts from conferences, so some things just don't change. I don't know how the extra letters ON got next to my name for GitHub there, but I'm various permutations of James O'Neill on different places, all without the apostrophe, so people do read it as one ill sometimes, but I'm on Twitter, GitHub, and I blog through GitHub as well, so you can find me in those various places. And you can email me. I'm actually going to use that domain in the demos. It's a live domain that's used for my little small business Azure subscription. There is a bug currently in the version on the gallery, which will be fixed as soon as I get back. But you can download the module straight from the gallery. If you search for ++ on the gallery, you'll find this module, and you'll find tab expansion ++ that Jason Shirk wrote some years ago, which gives you some extra things for manipulating argument completers, and the source is on my GitHub. So that's the where. The what, I joke about people who do really complicated PowerPoint slides. So here's a really complicated PowerPoint slide. I'm obviously not going to step through every one of these, but I wanted to give the sense here that Graph is a single entry point for lots and lots of different things. There have been other sessions on Graph, and I guess those of you who are sufficiently interested in it will know all the different components. That diagram, if you get hold of it, also labels various commands that are implemented in this module. So that's the idea of Graph. It's this common entry point for lots of things. And the module came about because I wanted a PowerShell interface to talk to various of those services, and the sensible way to do it was to get an understanding of Graph. Now, the history of it, I produced this thing, and then the folks in Redmond released some other bits, and I had a bit of a sulk, actually. I kind of went, I've done all this, and now you've kind of come along with yours, and I've wasted my time doing mine. And I had a look at what they'd done, and I went, actually, no, I haven't. And the idea of Graph++ is the modules that are out there, the product team call it an SDK. Okay? These are not PowerShell modules for people to use. Okay? If you've tried using them, you will be aware that they're not PowerShell modules for people to use. They are PowerShell, they're a basis for you to write something for people to use. They're not very PowerShell-y. They're really bad at taking pipelined input or prompting you to say, are you sure you want to delete these users? I mean, call me old-fashioned, people do, but I'd like to get a prompt that says, are you sure you want to delete this user? You know, that's the kind of thing that should be built in. This stuff doesn't do that routinely. I expect things in PowerShell to have tab completion, and they don't do that. In fact, there are a lot of things that they don't do. So having done my piece to implement most of the stuff that was on that previous slide, I looked at what they'd done and said, you know what, I can actually leverage this and interoperate it with it. So I said, well, I'll take some of the stuff that's in those modules and return those objects, because they'd done some quite smart things in there. They'd actually created some .NET objects to represent the objects that are returned by the Graph API. And I thought, well, I can use those, and I can write something that leverages all of that, and anybody that's written something to use those SDK modules can carry on using that and can use mine as well without having to change anything. And if there's anything that I haven't done, because I'm only implementing the sort of 20% of functionality that I care about, then people can come along and they can use that module as well. So there's a reliance on those modules. actually goes and looks for the DLLs that those modules are the core parts of those modules, and loads them. And if it can't load them, it skips some of the PowerShell bits that it would otherwise load. And the last thing, and when I first signed into to Graph in the demo, you'll see that I get signed in straight away. I'll sign out and sign in again just so that you can see what the process normally looks like. But it's geared very much for an interactive logon. But there are other ways that are supported for doing other sorts of logon. So as well as doing a logon with a code via a web browser, you can do a logon using service account, you can do a logon using a username and password, and I don't think Justin Grote is in the room, but if he is, thanks Justin, because Justin provided me something that said, oh, and if you've already got a session with Azure, you can say to Azure, I'd like an access token that's suitable for Microsoft Graph, please. So you go off and ask Azure for that token, and then you give that token to Graph, and Graph goes, oh yeah, I understand how to log you in and do all of that. The logon process requests all the necessary scopes. I'm not going to talk about scopes. If you're in Thomas's talk, Thomas covered scopes, and I don't really need to dwell on scopes. But as part of the configuration for the module, it has a list of scopes that it's going to request. So you can tell it to request more scopes or fewer scopes, depending on what you're going to do. Now, just a bit on why, and I really need a soapbox here. I know a few people have talked to me about stuff I've said on Twitter. I think of software and lots of IT stuff. I think of it like I'm still a kid actually stacking Lego bricks up, that one piece builds on top of another, and everything comes in layers. And at the topmost layer, you have a user looking down on a user interface. And we worry about what's in the bricks. But if you think about Lego, the sides of the bricks matter very little. It's the top and bottom that let the bricks plug together that matters. It's the interfaces. So a user cares about the user interface. User doesn't care what goes on inside your module. They don't care how clever you are. They care about, can I use this? Does it prompt me before I delete 50 users? And then down as we go lower down, we have a programming interface. And obviously the programs talk to a programming interface. So a programming interface might be making REST calls. So you get a definition that says these are all the REST calls, and somebody comes along and says, you know what, we can take one of these definitions and we can mechanically produce commands that run these definitions. But they don't have any of the bits in between that say, yeah, but when you delete a user, ask first. Or when you get a user, allow the user to request to request that user account by name. And so you get something like that definition that's the put up there. That's what the Graph API looks like. That's actually how stuff is written in some of the definition documents. And you get something that looks like that. So you have to provide an ID. You have to provide another ID for the user. And we get a very simple atomic command like that. And sometimes you see these, and I was in somebody else's session, and I've actually seen the presenter in here, so I don't want to embarrass them, but they were using something that was auto-generated, and the PowerShell command had become invoke list something or other by something, by this, by that. And I thought, invoke list? Isn't that get? And a lot of this stuff just gets generated without any intelligence. So I think of this like a sandwich. Yeah, you've got the user interface at the top, programming interface at the bottom, and in between, we've only got butter. Okay? I'm trying to put some cheese in that sandwich. Okay? So that's the idea with that. So the definitions that these auto-generators work from don't have the intelligence to say, you know, take this parameter from the pipeline, but not that one, or use what if, or tab expansion, and so on. And these sorts of things, if we're doing sort of set user, then shouldn't we be able to go set user, and I want to set this user's manager and their department and their phone number and 15 parameters about a user. I don't want to think about it as setting one property. So that tries to summarize all of that on a slide. The job is not to change how you get into the API from making a REST call to being a function. It's about producing usable functions and what I call adding PowerShelliness. Okay, so that's my sort of soapbox. All right. So, how does the module work? I mentioned a couple of these points, but when the module first loads, it knows what modules to go and look for from the SDK. It requires the authentication module. That's the only one that's non-optional. Goes and finds them. If the modules themselves aren't installed, it'll also have a look and see if you've just put the DLL in the PowerShell module directory. So I can just get the DLL, or I can install the whole module, and then looks for those modules, loads them, and then it says, and now I've loaded that, I can load a set of PowerShell functions that work with users, or work with teams, or work with the planner, or work with SharePoint, and so on. So that gives us the commands. We've then got to log in. And this is one of the places where I'm actually quite grateful that the product team came along and did their part, because logging in was always the most painful part of all. Okay? And particularly if you wanted to display some kind of dialogue from PowerShell, because what you had to do was you had to create a simple Windows Forms app which contained a web browser. And that web browser was some vestigial bit of Internet Explorer. We all know what's happened to Internet Explorer. I remember Internet Explorer coming out. That makes me feel really old that it's that old, and you know, I've lived the whole. I heard somebody on the radio say, "I remember when the iPod was new," and lamenting Apple ending the production of the iPod. And it's the same kind of thing I feel for Internet Explorer. I remember it coming out, and it's gone. But there are still places that use bits of Internet Explorer. One of those is if you use a web browser control. So building that stuff was just horrible and painful, and every time there was a revision to anything, something somewhere broke. So we just switched to using Connect MG Graph, which is part of the authentication module, and I just have something called Connect Graph, which is a wrapper for Connect MG Graph. And if you've already connected, incidentally, you don't have to rerun mine. You can say, I've got a script that already does this stuff and calls Connect MG Graph, and I just want to use James's Get Graph User. Fine, do that. That works. And the pattern for a PowerShell style function is make sure we've got a connection, make sure it's the right kind of connection for what we're going to try and work with. You can't do certain things when you've logged on with a service account, for example. It's no good saying, give me information about me when you're a service account. We then call the product groups invoke mggraph request, which wraps all the stuff around making a web request, all the stuff around authentication, and just makes everything happen for us underneath. And that comes back with some JSON. That JSON does not always correspond to the object that is defined in the objects that are defined in the DLLs. So we have to do a little bit of fiddling with those objects in order to allow them to be created. And the problem with that I was mentioning earlier that I've got to upload the fix for, the REST call is now sending back some additional properties on one or two things. And when we go to create the object, it goes, you can't create the object because you've got a spurious property here. And so a few properties need to be removed before we create the objects. And then once those objects are created, I've got type.ps1 files and format.ps1 files to actually do smart things with those objects. And we'll see some of those fairly early in the demo as well. Just a quick show of hands. Who mucks about with types XML files and format XML files? Very, very few. Okay. These can be quite intimidating, but they're how you control the format of a random object. Okay, so you get an object back courtesy of some bit of .NET, and it's got 57 different parameters on it, and you want to show 3. And you just define a format file that says, show this as a table, and I want these 3 columns in my table. Or you say, this object has got an interesting, some interesting methods, but I'd like this additional method, please. And that's what a types file does. The types file can also say, I don't even need to define the format rigorously. These are the interesting properties. So when you go to display this one's got 4 interesting properties. You figure out what to do with 4 properties, PowerShell. So, oh dear, I've run out of slides. I'm going to have to demo this, aren't I? So how do we use it? What does it look like? There will be some errors in this. As it says on the slide, there are a couple of places where I want it to show you errors so that I can explain something. And there are other errors that are just going to occur because they happen spontaneously. So we'll see what happens when we come to demo this. If you've ever seen someone who doesn't trust a network connection lining up to do a demo that is absolutely dependent on a network connection, Let's make that a little bit larger and easier to see. So first of all, I'm just going to do a quick thing to count the number of commands I've got available in my session before I load this. And it's doing it again. I'm not sure why F8 is acting up in Visual Studio Code either. But right now, there are 228 commands loaded. I'm just going to import my module. Now, if you have the whole of the SDK module, it takes about a minute to load everything. Fortunately, as you can see, that doesn't take quite so long. I'd love to know why. I'm just going to restart Visual Studio Code for no better reason than to see if I can get this strange F8 behavior to go away. And at this point, oh, come on. No, I don't know why it's going to do that, but we might be living with that for a while. So I'm just going to import that. Do it the old-fashioned way, copy and paste. So it only takes a second or two to load. As I say, if you go and get the whole of the SDK module, the last time I timed it, it was taking 2.5 minutes to load all the components. Okay, and if I do this same operation again, just to see how many commandlets I've got, I've gone up to 398, so I've added 170 commands in this module. So it says it was ready for connect graph, so I'll run connect graph, and there you go, it says, I'm logged on, welcome to Microsoft Graph++, my username. And if I go disconnect graph, and go connect graph again, it actually wants me to log on. I'm going to make sure I log on with my administrative account. And now I can close that. And we're back here and I'm logged in. So usually it's an interactive logon, but I can set things up so that I use I knew I should have saved that. I can set things up so that I can use different logon methods. So I was saying about what I expect to be able to do, for example. So I expect to be able to type something like get graph user, and I don't know about you, but I'm just too lazy to be typing usernames all the time. So I expect that to tab complete, right? And if somebody asks me to put in a GUID to identify a user, they're going to get a very rude response, especially if they expect me to type it. So there's my user. Do people in the audience, I know I'm not talking to a mainly British audience, do we recognise the name Jacob Marley? Okay. Have you ever watched the Muppets Christmas Carol? Okay, so Marley is the person who is dead at the start of A Christmas Carol, all right? One of the best opening lines for a book that you can quote to an English audience is, Marley was dead to begin with. And then the ghost of Marley appears to Scrooge. I'd never thought, I tell you what, if my old English teacher could see me explaining the plot of Dickens to a non-English audience, the shock would kill him. Anyway. The problem with Jacob is, look, Jacob's got direct reports. Okay? We can see Bob Cratchit still reports to Jacob. So I expect to be able to do something like take those users and do set graph user. Of course, don't try and tab complete that. And we're going to set their manager, and I think I should probably be their manager. after I set up this company and I created a domain, mobularconsulting.com, I realized that I wasn't going to want to give out James O'Neill at mobularconsulting.com, so my user ID is just J. So I expect to be able to change those users like that. And if I do get graph user, okay, now we can see, let's actually just make that a little bit smaller so it works a bit better on this screen. Get graph user. Okay, we can see I've got some users and we make up some silly usernames. But also, when I deal with these users, I said about creating property sets for users. You can have a default property set that tells PowerShell just show these, but I've got a property set called organization. So if I tell format table, give me the organizational view, you can see that it changes. Okay, and that's what I expect the stuff to do out of the box. This is what the SDK wasn't doing. Okay, so I'm going to take a group here called presenters, because I called it speakers there, and I knew I'd get that wrong. But I can do something like group name equals speakers. We've got a new project we're going to call Vienna. I can't believe we've got this far without any Ultravox references, but I'm not going to be the first person to... No. You're all too young as well. It won't mean anything to you. You see, I fell into the trap. So I can get a list of users in that group. You'll see throughout this demo, by the way, I'm using a lot of out variable so that I can... This is a tip for other presenters as much as anything else. This is a really useful way to show something in one command and then to use that output in the next command, but you can keep showing it step by step. So there are my users who are presenters. Yes, Jacob Marley does keep appearing. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a new team. Okay, so it's going to be new team, that's going to be the name, it's going to have that as a description, it's going to be public, and those people are going to be members of it. I just point out here that the user I'm logged on as is my administrative account, so it's this James one, and the user that I'm putting in the group is my everyday account, the one that's just called J, and so I'm not going to be a member of this group myself. So as an administrator, I'm creating the group, but I'm not going to be a member of it. So let's actually create that group. And over here in Teams, you might notice that I've used this environment for other departments before now. And we'll have a look. I'll just create that team. Oh. We'll see if this is going to work, because this is always where we go. How many times is it going to take to actually do this? Eerie silence. Oh, it did it, right, okay. And look, I've got the pop-up down the bottom that says James, because that's administrative James, has added you to this team. So if I go over to Teams, oh look, there's presenters, okay. You don't have to clap, but it did work. And there's another trick that I've got, because I'm going to work with OneDrive. So I can say, get me this team's OneDrive. Okay, and there's the OneDrive. But it would be really useful if that was my default drive. So I've got this thing of set graph home drive, Shift F8. No, F8. Go on. So that's my OneDrive for that team, and Team Drive now points to that. So I can actually start working with that drive. So if I go get the documents folder, folder exists but there's nothing in it. Okay, what's in the root folder? And in the root folder we've got documents and we've got general. So that's the newly created drive for those users. And I might say, okay, I want to upload some files to there, so get child item, let's find something that whoa, that's not going to work. We'll use, let's use multiple files. Live dangerously. So these are some files that I created in yesterday's presentation. They're just some Excel files, and I expect to be able to say, copy those to a graph folder. I mean, that's the sort of thing you expect to be able to do. So using my default drive, go to the root of that drive and to the general folder, and let's see if those actually upload. Oh look, there they go. So they're going to general, and that says out variable item. So in item I've got that, and I'll just start the second one of those. Oh, item.web URL. No, web URL. So I can go straight to that on SharePoint, and that opens in, because it's an Excel file, SharePoint knows how to open that file because it's part, and I just uploaded it to my OneDrive. So we can keep doing all this kind of stuff, and I can keep sort of demoing this pretty much indefinitely. We can add, for example, I said we were going to look at some of the stuff in Teams. Teams is quite useful here, so let's just show you what's in the channels for this team. Oh, what? Okay, maybe that's a point to say we have 10 minutes to run. I'm going to move to questions in a second. But what I would like to do is just to show you that that still works. So you saw that I created a team there, and I've now got a new channel added to that team. Okay, and you can see I've now got the Vienna channel in that team. So I can keep going, I can add messages, and a lot of the pieces down here are to do with adding things to Teams, because that was the place where this demo was initially created. But you can also see I work with the planner, I work with creating tabs in Teams, more stuff with SharePoint, and so on. So I think, given the error about a tenant problem there, I am not going to push my luck with the demo. I think we have 10 minutes left, and rather unusually, I shall leave some time for some questions. So thank you for that, and if there are any questions, now is a good time to ask them. Gentleman there.
What's about copying files from one team to another, except specifically from another tenant?
So the question is copying files between teams and particularly between tenants. I don't think there is support in anywhere I've seen in Graph to have two concurrent sessions open with two different tenants. So if you're going to copy between two teams in the same tenant, it's quite easy. You copy the files locally and then you have to copy them back up again. If you're copying between two tenants, then it's copy locally and either log out and log in again, which you can automate, or have two PowerShell sessions going at the same time. I would advise you not to try and have two PowerShell sessions open with different subscriptions at the same time, because you might have noticed when I first logged in, the authentication module remembered my previous connection. If you try and get two connections going at the same time, there is a very strong possibility that the two sessions will fight. Okay, so I would do them sequentially and not try and do two sessions. You may get it to work, but I would just have a little worry about reliability with having two sessions at the same time. So sequentially, I think, is the way to do that one. Oh, and while that copy command, by the way, there is a copy in the opposite direction command. So there's copy to the folder and copy from the folder. Any other questions?
You didn't show us how hard it will be to do the same thing with a Microsoft product. So people can appreciate it.
I could. My recommendation, so Alex is saying I haven't shown you how hard it would be to do it with the pure SDK commands. No, I haven't. There's a couple of reasons for doing that. I did put one on the first page about set MG user manager. And some of those, but a lot of this stuff, I heard a couple of people draw breath when I just did a tab complete and it filled in the username, yeah. And if I go and say, I've got this, if I go and do something like this, new graph. Don't try and tab complete because it's right at the wrong end of the alphabet. Minus. I can put in a user principal name or a mail nickname or the domain name, display name, but I'm just going to come up with a new user. So I'm going to call this user Robin because I'm silly, and I'm going to give him a surname of Banks. And what else do I want to say? I'm going to say that their manager is going to be Bob. And they're going to be in the presenters group. And I expect all that to work. And I expect that user to get created and actually to have the system work out what their user principal name should be, put them in the right domain, do all the necessary things. It's even assigned them a default password. Okay. Azure doesn't often the Microsoft stuff won't let you put in a password in this format interactively, but I find these are really good passwords. They meet most people's rules. They're easy to remember, and basically they're any day between the 1st of January 1800 and the 31st of December 2100. Okay, so I can just give people a date, and it's not like, oh yeah, you've got these completely untypable things. But I've done all the stuff to set that user up, and that's not a massively difficult command. And I should really, I did put in their manager. I put in the manager. I could put in various other things that I can set for a user, and I can just do that from a single command, because that's what I expect to do as a system administrator. Okay. The people who produced the SDK for this, their focus is on an API. So I've got an API that will let you set a user's password. Well, congratulations, well done, excellent work. Now how do I use it? Well, you get the GUID that represents the user. Whoa, stop there. right? I'm not getting a GUID. I'm a human. Let the programs go and get the GUIDs. Okay? This is what I mean about this meat in the sandwich thing. If you just take an API and make it into a command, you've got an API that you type instead of being an API in a REST call. Okay? That is not useful for people to work with. So I come along and I put that stuff in. And yeah, I'd recommend anyone who kind of wants to say, well, how do we rate the job that James did? Yeah, try and do that example with the SDK commands, because it's about 8 or 9 commands.
What happens when, obviously that's multiple graph calls
Yeah.
in a row. So what happens if along the line call 4 breaks? How do you capture that?
So that's a very good question. So the question, so that it gets on the recording, what I've done there is obviously multiple calls. So what happens if the first 1 or 2 work and then somewhere down the chain one of them breaks? Well, I'm an excellent programmer and I do really good error checking. It varies from command to command, to tell you the truth. Usually, if it's something like creating a user and then setting the properties, I don't make the thing transactional and roll it back. Okay? You could say I should roll it back if I can't complete it, but my take on most of these things is that if I'm able to create that user and then I fail to set his manager, that's okay as a partially complete piece of work that I can then come along and rectify the error afterwards. Okay? So in that particular case, I don't feel the need to make it transactional and roll the whole thing back. So what will usually happen is it will make all the calls, and if one of them fails, it will continue and try and make the others. So I can't remember, without going and looking at the code, whether I put the user in the groups before or after I set the manager. But if groups are after the manager and manager fails, I will still try and do the groups because the partial thing still has some value. There are 1 or 2 cases where you can look at it and go, actually, that one you really should roll the whole thing back. But in most cases, there's no need to make it transactional. 2 more questions, and we've got 2 minutes on the clock. So I'm going to ask the gentleman nearer me with the mask on. Yeah.
Since you are dependent, the module is dependent on the SDK.
Yeah.
Is there any, when you have to update your module or the SDK, how do you update the
So, because, again, to repeat the question, because I have a dependency or set of dependencies on the SDK, how do I update? When a new version comes out, I test it. I get reports from people who say this. In fact, this one, the latest change, isn't a change in the SDK. It's a change in what the REST API is doing. They haven't updated the module they haven't updated the module to have the extra property on the object. When things change, so far, the number of breakages has been really, really small. But yeah, I test it and then a new version gets posted to the gallery. And I do try and track where one version breaks another. Because I haven't completely run out of time, I will take that question from the gentleman under the light.
Thank you, James. Great stuff. So my question is, at the beginning you showed a command and then it retries 6 times, 4 times. Is Graph doing that, or is it?
No. So there are actually two objects being created at the same time. One of them is is like an Active Directory group, and the other is a Teams team. And the retry is when it goes to teamify that group, it has to wait for the group to finish creating. And sometimes that happens instantly, and sometimes there seems to be a synchronization problem. And I think this is because when you make the two REST calls, they may actually be processed on different machines at the Microsoft end. And so there's a little bit of a synchronization delay while we say, learn that group now exists and you can make it a Teams team. Okay? And so all that happens in my code is there's something that says sleep for a second or two and then retry, and it will. And I think it's got 10 or 12 retries in it, but it will keep retrying, and eventually it will give up. But that's a known issue on the server side.
For the bottle on your elbow, if there's water in there, I saw you.
Oh. The number of near misses I've had this week between the glasses, I've already tipped half a bottle of water over the laptop. Yeah, I will be lucky if I get on the plane and get home with all my limbs attached. Anyway, we made it. We've now overrun. But thank you for actually some of the best questions I've been asked in one of the sessions that I've done. So thank you for the questions.